thanks to Professor Maropiante for inviting me to this end of the summer school. And yes, my name is Raul Caruso from Cattolica University in Milan, and I'm happy that Mario already said that we just founded a new center at the Cattolica University, which is called the International Peace Science Center, because I've been doing this for now 25 years in my research, and it was time to run a new center on peace science rather than that's not some advertising already. Mario introduced that I'm also editor-in-chief of this journal, that some PhD students could be interested to submit a paper. It's an interdisciplinary journal which is performing quite well. It's called Peace Science, Peace Economics, Peace Science and Public Policy. Is published by De Gruyter, which is a German publisher. And if you want to submit a paper, let me know. So what's the child I've been given is quite demanding, in the sense that, as Mario said, I should cover some points about the political economy of military economy. Of course, the core of a military economy, a war economy, is nothing but a military expenditure. And basically, what I'm doing is simply that I'm giving some brief concept on the military expenditure, also to highlight some frequent mistakes that people do when dealing with military expenditures. And then I'm going to present the highlights of some recent research recently published. I had planned to present 4 pieces, but now, since the time is so short, I think I'm going to present only 3 out of 4. But anyway, so of course, I'll give you the presentation once finished. So what's about military expenditure? I think all of you know what I'm speaking about. I mean, military expenditure is nothing but the quota of public spending devoted to everything related to military, from defense forces to military missions, whatever. Okay, and even most importantly, in recent times, arms acquisition. And as you know, the military spending is on rise. In the latest years. You can see that. Thank you. You can see that, in particular, in the latest couple of years, after the large-scale invasion, after the escalation of war in Ukraine, military spending has been rising even more. In particular, but in a long run perspective, what we have observed is that basically the regions in the world which have been increasing military spending for years have been Asia, then basically China and India, Africa, and Middle East. Western countries like US and Europe have been increasing military spending, but at a slower pace. Of course, because Western countries have been for years the top spenders, but significantly you can see that Eastern Europe, been in particular in the latest couple of years, have been increasing massively military spending. It's not only Ukraine and Russia, but all the countries bordering Ukraine and Russia have been increasing military spending, at least since 2014. Consider that there is a widespread mistake that's, in particular in the media, that the media speaks about the war between Russia and Ukraine as saying that the war has erupted in 2022. That's a fake news, because the war erupted in 2014. So all Eastern European countries have been increasing military spend since 2014, after the Russian invaded Crimea and Donbass. Of course, we had another common mistake that is quite widespread in the media, is that we look at which country is the top spender. Of course, the top spender in the world is is the US, which is sometimes 10 times any other country, Russia or whatever. But this is not the point. The point is that this idea is a mistake. That is not, I mean, I'm not saying that's is not true. Of course, the US is the top spender, but the common mistake we do is that we consider military spending in levels. What we have to see, one of the few that has maintained this for years, is that we have to consider military expenditure like any other public spending. That means we have to weight military spending compared to the population, compared to the other public spending. Otherwise, we don't get the intensity of such attitude the government have with respect to militarization. And if you look at the top per capita military spending, what you see is that the top is Israel. USA is still among the top spender, but look at the Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia is one of the top, is in the top 5 ranking of spender if we consider military spending per capita. That means per each individual. Consider that Saudi Arabia, for example, has been increasing military spending for 20 years now. Only a few years ago, it's the top spender, one of the top spender in the world. Is for the first time we have observed one country which is not in the Security Council of the United Nations among the top spenders. What I'm saying is basically that until a few years ago, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, so Russia, US, UK, China, and France, were also the top spenders in military expenditure. Saudi Arabia has been the first country not to be among the top spenders without being in the UN Security Council. Okay. Another relevant measure that I would use is the ratio between military spending and the government spending, because this captures to what extent the government is committed to increase militarization within the country. You see the Belarus is on the top, and the famous Saudi Arabia I was speaking before is in the second ranked, Qatar, Somalia, Pakistan. So in this kind of ranking, most Western countries don't appear. That means that in most Western countries, most richer countries, of course, the ratio between military spending and the general government spending is smaller. In developing economies, such ratio is much higher. Okay, in many cases, we know that these countries have lower levels of democracy with respect to ours. Another interesting trend is that if you look at this left part of the table, is basically that military spending has been changing shape in the latest 10 years. The latest 10 years since 2014, since the NATO summit in Wales in September 2014, after the Russian invaded Crimea, the military spending devoted to equipment has been increasing massively. What does it mean? It means that in military spending, is usually we do split, according to the NATO standard measurement, we do split military spending to 3 main parts. One is personnel, the soldiers, basically. The fat generals, the US fat generals. You've seen what I exit as the fat general. I think it doesn't know how many fat soldiers we have in Italy. Anyway, so the soldiers, the equipment, means the weapons. Third, the infrastructures. Okay, of course, there is a kind of bridge between the 2 main items. There is called the idea of deployable troops that we'll see afterwards. A deployable troop is considered a soldier which is equipped enough to take part into an open battle on the field, which is a small percentage of the total personnel. For example, in Europe, on average, only 1/3 of soldier is equipped enough to take part in a battle. Okay, so this explains why in the latest 10 years, we have been increasing expenditure in equipment, that means weapons, that means arms trade worldwide, okay? So, but why do countries arm? Because now you would say that, okay, now that we have a war, we have wars somewhere, we have wars at least in 2 clusters of wars in the world. So you think that countries do arm because do acquire weapons because they war, but it's not true. In reality, why I told you that Asia has been the region where the military has been increasing for years, because there are no wars in Asia. Okay, and there won't be wars in the next future. But usually, countries do acquire weapons. I mean, do increase military expenditure for 3 reasons. First, there are security concerns. Okay, that's the expectable, but basically because of some affordability. Unfortunately, military expenditure is procyclical. It means that when countries get richer, countries get acquire more weapons, do arm more, even if there are no security concern. Third, autocrats increase military spending much more than the democratic leaders. Why they do that? Simply because they don't need to be reelected. Dictators don't need to be reelected. Don't need to redistribute in healthcare or in education or any kind, any other public spending. So basically, the point is the problem that we have with military spending. The military spending increase even if there are no conflicts. And so the point is that sometimes that's because the relation could be the opposite. It's not the conflict that determines military expenditure, but rather could be military expenditure that's inflame conflicts. Why? Because you all know that supporters of military expenditure use quite abused concept, the idea of deterrence. But deterrence has been developed many years ago in the 60s of the last century by some colleagues who were mathematicians or economists. And deterrence is a static concept. If you have studied some economics, but in general, some political science, the idea of deterrence is nothing but a stable equilibrium, an cooperative game, the Nash equilibrium. It's a famous movie about John Nash. The idea is quite simple, is that some rational actors do some choices, and this choice is not going to be changed. That in reality, it's really unlikely that happens. Okay, so the deterrence is a very static concept. And in the latest years, some part of old literature, which is more interesting because it's dynamic, it's based upon a dynamic idea. The dynamic idea developed by a mathematician called Louis Fry Richards in 1960 is the idea of the arms race. The arms race is not a static idea. It's not a static game. It's rather a dynamic game. If I increase my weapons, you're going to increase your weapons. Then I'm going to increase my weapons again. So it's a dynamic game. Is such game stable, or does this game lead to instability? According to many colleagues, many scholars, the answer is yes. And there is a large literature which is forgotten to some extent, that could be useful to rediscover in order to understand the failures of the idea of deterrence. So one of the main problems we have is exactly this idea of deterrence. So the point is that it's not the conflict which leads to military expenditure, but rather it could be military expenditure which leads conflict. And this happens more frequently where we have advancement in technology, like in this year. In this year, when you have some technological advancement, you, as a policymaker, you feel the overconfidence of being the famous some secret weapon that could give you some advantage in an armed conflict. So this is actually, and that's fun because, you know, Thomas Schelling was the father of the idea of deterrence. Thomas Schelling has the same, that's the legacy of Adam Smith to some extent, that everybody speaks about the invisible hands, but nobody has read The Wealth of Nations of Adam Smith. So everybody speaks about Keynes, but with the exception of Professor Pian, nobody has read the Keynes. So everybody speaks about the Terence of Schelling, but nobody has read Thomas Schelling. Thomas Schelling, in 1960, released The Strategy of Conflict. In 1961, released another book, forgotten book called Arms Control, and the idea was rather simple. If in a period of advancement in technology, deterrence is no longer feasible unless there is an agreement between enemies to control arms. That was basically the concept behind the nuclear agreement between USSR and US. Okay, so if this is true, what we know about military expenditure? We know that they can lead to instability. What about the political economy? Sometimes policymakers need to justify that we can benefit from military spending because there are advancement of technologies descending from military spending. I think you all know the famous fake news of internet created by military. This is not true. That's a fake news because the first email has been sent between from Berkeley to Stanford. That I still believe that there are two universities. There are not two military camps. And the World Wide Web has been developed in Geneva at the CERN. No, it's not too bad. So anyway, but everybody maintains that it has been created for military purposes. It's not true. But in general, military spending are detrimental for economic growth. But we'll come afterwards, even if there is a shortage of time. What we also know about military spending, we are interested in how allies split the burden of military expenditure, if they do, or if they don't. For example, the problem we have with NATO now, with the European Union countries, is that who is going to pay the bill of the war between Russia and Ukraine? And what we don't know, because there is a large room for research in military spending. What we don't know, we have some ideas on how military spending increase conflict, but we don't know, for example, what's the general impact of militarization on regimes, on democracy. We know that democracy decreases, militarization. We don't know what happens on the other side, whether or not militarization is detrimental for democracy. We don't know a lot about arms trade. There are very few studies, even because the data about military industry are quite obscure some extent. And of course, we know almost nothing about the military industry, in the sense that there are only 3 studies published in the economic literature about military firms. Only 3. One is mine. So I wanted to show some results. I don't know, I have another 50 minutes, right? The first one is exactly about this very recent publication I made with a former spiritual student of mine, which is a study about military industry in the US and the relation between the US political cycle. The first part perhaps is the most demanding because it has been released a couple of months ago on Defense and Peace Economics, which is the leading journal on this topic. And what's the point? The point is that there are no data on military firms. What's the problem with military firms? The problem with military firms is that there is now, in particular because of the technological advancement, there is this something that we have defined a dual engagement. So that we have firms which work in both civilian and military sector, in particular in the US, and this determines some lack of data, because of course, if you have to study firms, we should need clear-cut data on the military aspect, on the military division of these firms. For example, one example is everybody know Lockheed Martin, okay, because Lockheed Martin is the main contractor of the Pentagon, but few people know that Boeing or even Amazon, they are main contractors of the Pentagon. But of course, Amazon, maybe you bought a book on Amazon yesterday, but you don't know that Amazon is one of the main contractors of the Department of Defense. Even Boeing, all of you has taken a flight on a civilian aircraft, but Boeing also produce engine for military aircraft and so on. So basically, this is the point. The point is to disentangle the civilian parts of the firm performance from the military part. How we have done this? We have used all the database. It's a quite demanding research in terms of time. It's quite time-consuming because you have to use cross-reference between several data sets, which are not for free. That only university can afford this kind of data set. But the point is that we needed an idea to disentangle, and the idea has been as emerged looking at exactly is not, I have to confess, of course, it wasn't my idea, it was my PhD student idea. It's the mission of a PhD student to have new ideas, of course. And the idea behind was that even if it's true that firms are investing a lot in military technology, is there any track of this? And the track is in the world of patents. Do you know what is this? This is the number of patents on military release in the latest years. You see what's happening? In the past, everybody was in love with the idea of the secret weapon, so disclosure about military technology was not so frequent. Consider that in the US, there is still a law called Innovation Secrecy Act, that the Federal Bureau of Patents, they are able to stop any kind of patenting if they think that innovation, that invention could have military application, okay? And but now recently, all these startups or even this bigger company are starting applying for patents in military technology. So what we have done is basically we have downloaded all the data of firms, all the data for firms with military patents, and then we have chosen all the firms which have public data. That means most of them are listed firms, because in the US there is no obligation like in Italy or like in Europe to release the economic balance sheet. So quickly, in the end, even if there are some thousands of military firms, we have been able only to identify only the bigger ones because they are listed. So just slightly more than 100. And we created this data set, and in order to verify whether or not it was reliable, we compared this data set with the famous CPRI data set of top military companies, which is the knowledge source of the top military company in the world. And just to give you an idea, this is just to give you an idea. Oh, why did in this interpolation, you can see that our data called bill firm are highly correlated with the CPRI data. That means that we basically have done a kind of enrichment work because we have been able to collect more data than CPRI, but they are quite correlated. So this was the difficult part. We connected this part with the political cycle in US, because there is an established, there was an established literature called political business cycle in US. And basically what we have done, we have consider whether or not the growth rate, the change in military revenues of these firms depends on the political cycle, depends on the elections. And so in terms of methodology, what we have done? First, we have collected the other economic data of the firms in order to verify that our estimation were correct, and then we collected the political data. I show only this one. And what you see here, we considered separately all the election years. That means the presidential year, the executive year of election, the midterm, and so on. Consider that in the U.S. Any election is held in November. That means that even if you consider the whole year, the performance of the firm has to be considered even for the previous 10 months. So basically, in brief, what is the main outcome? That's there is a different. I mean, democracy in US, since it's not like in Italy that we have different timing in election. So the electoral cycle explains the revenues of military firms. What does it mean? It means that, in particular, it explains that in the presidential year, military revenues increase. In the pre-presidential year, the revenues decrease. What's the explanation for this? The explanation is that the year before the election, the candidates have to run with some platform that the voters prefer, and the voters prefer healthcare, prefer whatever, but they don't prefer that military firms increase their revenues. But once everything has been already appropriated, then immediately before there is the hand of the president or the incumbent, he can the president can move resources to the military sector immediately before the elections. So it's why we see that basically immediately before the presidential election, the military revenues increase. So of course, this is just the baseline results. Of course, we have some alternative estimation with some alternative, but the basic explanation is this one. So basically, this was okay. This was the first paper I wanted to present. It basically says that recently is really one of the few papers on military firms in the world. The demanding part is how to collect the data about firms. The easiest part is about election, because the results are, as more or less, are not so unbelievable. I mean, it's quite expectable. It's interesting is that incumbent and other candidates, in particular the incumbent, choose the right timing before at least at the chosen in the past, because we don't know that they are going to vote anymore in the future. They have chosen the right timing in order to support the military sector. Okay, consider that one of the best way that the U.S. incumbent president has is not about funding. It's about removing or relaxing sanction against the. So sometimes the incumbent, they handle the sanction against the dictators, because most sanctions are on weapons. So if they relax sanction, they basically support the sector without the clear-cut spending. The second paper I wanted to present, whose result I would like to present in 5 minutes. Yes, only three. Okay, it's about. So maybe you prefer to present something about Europe or the UN. 2 minutes. I can do everything. Okay, so 3 and 2. Okay, so the first one in 3 minutes is about we run an exercise on the arms trades during the Cold War, and the idea was basically that we enrich the work of some colleagues in the U.S. and The point is, did the CIA intervention increase arms trades, U.S. export towards, and what happened to the other? And this trade, increase or decrease trade, has been substituted, was crowding out trade of other NATO countries. What we have done is basically we have studied a model of trade, which is quite common in economics, which is called a gravity model. And basically, we have considered the arms trade between US and all the countries which have received a direct intervention of CIA or an influence of CIA. For example, Italy was considered a country under the influence of CIA. Of course, Chile had a direct intervention of CIA. So, if we go to the result, what we see basically is that if you see these stars with regard U.S. exports, U.S. export a major MCYW stands for major conventional weapons. Okay, so the idea is quite simple. In all countries intervened by CIA, the U.S. increased their arms exports. Of course, you can say, okay, what's the surprise? I mean, of course, the autocrats supported by CIA needed some weapons. But the point is that the coefficient are quite substantial in the sense the increase in arms in export was quite massive. What happened to the other countries, to the other NATO countries? Do European countries have increased their export to these countries too? This was, I think, the interesting part of the story. Not about major conventional weapons, or at least only when the CIA intervention has lasted many years. That means that as the time goes by in the intervened countries, at a certain point in time, even the European countries started to increase to export weapons to these countries. Okay? If we look at the small arms, I mean, rifles, the arms for dictators, I mean, the arms for policemen, guns, rifle, and small weapons, we see that there is, in the intervening countries, the US has increased their exports, that's okay, but European countries, so the other NATO countries, has decreased their exports. So in the sense that the CIA intervention, if we consider the weapons of the dictator, so the guns, the police, you know, as crowded out export from other NATO countries. That this implies that in this kind of markets, of course, political connection matter, but alliance perhaps don't matter so much in the market. Okay. So this was the second paper we released 1 year ago on economics letters. And then just to give you the flavor of another study I'm doing is about Europe, just 1 minute. You know, this is military spending in Europe, okay? This, okay, in particular, this histogram is the spending per capita. Because when the policymaker claimed that we don't spend enough, the point is that how to measure this. Because if you measure per capita, you see that the military spending per capita in Europe is getting high. But anyway, the point is that, as I told you, since 2014, after Russians, this is the expenditure in equipment. It has been flat for years, and then it increased, okay? So now we are shifting, no soldier anymore, equipment, okay? And what is implying? When Donald Trump says that we have to increase our spending to 5% of GDP, basically he's saying you have to import weapons from US. And so what's happening? That basically in the latest couple of years, since our productive capacity, I mean, we are not able to produce all the weapons that apparently we need. Of course, we are importing weapons from US, Israel, and South Korea, in particular, Eastern countries. Okay, so 30 seconds just to give you an idea, the last idea. We released during the COVID, I spent the summer of the COVID working on a report for the European Parliament on the disintegration of military spending in Europe and whether or not there were room for improving efficiency. The idea is basically that there is an empirical methodology to evaluate whether or not public spending is efficient. Okay, the point is this methodology is based upon one simple idea, that there must be an output. We have an input, there must be an output. So if you have an hospital, you have, the input are the number of beds, the output are the number of patients, the people in the weekend in these beds, okay? What's the output? What is the output of military spending? What's the output of military commitment? Eh? Now, words is too much. I mean, the point is that there is a lack of research. One of the most important lack of research is that we, in economics at least, that we don't know exactly what's the output of military spending. And what we have done, we have considered as output the idea that I told you at the beginning, the idea of deployable troops. That's basically the idea that also at the NATO headquarters they have. How many deployable troops do we have? I mean, how many troops equipped enough do we have? Trained and equipped, okay? And few. In Europe, we have few, but I cannot show everything because I don't have time, but the idea is quite here. Basically, all European countries have their own military spending. Everybody knows this. The point is that if we have the question, there would be a rationale to integrate military spending at European level? The point is yes, because in the latest years, since most of our troops are not deployable, we basically have wasted billions and billions of euros. Now what's happening? It's happening that since we are increasing spending without integrating, we are wasting again. Consider that only a few weeks ago we were speaking about tanks. Now we are speaking about drones. And tomorrow we're going to speak about artificial intelligence because we don't know what to do. And we already didn't know before. So the point is that even if we don't know exactly what is the correct output or the correct demand for weapons, the point is that integrating at European level would be, in any case, a good choice. Does not mean the big European army, but at least starting from the industry. I don't have time, so I would go to the final slide. Thank you.